Do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So, hello and welcome everyone to this MedDRA Coding Basics webinar. I'm Carolyn Wilson and work as a medical officer at the MSSO and will be your instructor today. And I'm joined by my colleague Leander Mold, who has been speaking to you before. So we both will take you through this webinar that will take around 2 hours. We have plenty of time for demonstrations and exercises and of course, also for addressing your questions. And as Leander has already mentioned, please submit any questions that you may have during the webinar through the question panel that you can find in the control panel of the GoToWebinar application. And I will allow as much time as possible for questions both during the course and also at the end of the presentation. But just to let you know, please do not raise specific coding questions that you came across, as we can't help you with individual verbatim terms, but we can guide you, and this is the intention of this webinar, in terms of coding principles. We will start with 2 standard slides with some relevant information about MedDRA and this training material. ICH adopted the development of MedDRA in the mid-1990s and finally became the owner of the terminology. ICH then, on contract, appointed the MSSO to take care of the maintenance and further development of the terminology based on user feedback, to provide and organize corresponding training as the one that we have today, and to administer the MedDRA licenses. And all activities of the MSSO are overseen by the so-called ICH MedDRA Steering Committee, with members of the regulatory bodies and pharmaceutical industry associations in Europe, US, and Japan, Health Canada, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MedDRA in UK, and the WHO as an observer. And since May 2025, new members have joined the group, namely the Chinese National Medicinal Products Administration, or short NMPA, the Saudi Food and Drug Authority, or FDA, and a member of the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, or IFPMA, as an observer. ICH is not only the owner of MedDRA itself, but also owns this training material. It is protected worldwide. You may use the slides with the exception of the MedDRA and ICH logos, but will have to clearly indicate that ICH owns the copyright. Also, any adaptations of the slides have to be clearly labeled. The second bullet point on this slide refers to warranty and liability issues you should be aware of, and the third bullet point is not relevant for today. Here an overview on what we will cover today. At first, we will shortly address the topic of MedDRA structure and characteristics, just as a refresher. We will then discuss the need for coding conventions when using MedDRA, and look into one important document you should make yourself familiar with, the Points to Consider, or PTC document for MedDRA term selection, that provides principal rules for MedDRA coding. We will then learn about the functionalities of the MedDRA browsers that are provided by the MSSO. You can use them for free in the framework of your MedDRA license to browse the terminology and to look for appropriate terms for coding purposes. And I will demonstrate how to use the browser to search the terminology. After that, we will go through some coding examples and I will demonstrate how to use the browser for the searches. And after that, you have the opportunity to try some coding with MedDRA yourself using this browser and to provide your suggestions for additional examples. And we will conclude with a question and answer session, as mentioned at the beginning, but we will address your questions throughout the whole session as well. The next two slides now explain about the polling. Leander has mentioned already that we will be using quiz questions during this webinar. And if you would like to join the quizzes and participate in the examples today, there are two ways to do so. The easiest way is to scan this QR code with your smartphone or tablet. It will bring you directly to the poll. Or you may enter the indicated web address into the URL bar at the top of your internet browser in your computer, tablet, or cell phone. You don't have to enter your name because this poll is completely anonymous, but enter my credentials. That is Carol N. Wills 584. And then nothing else needs to be entered, just skip anything else and join the poll. And Leander has put these credentials in the chat as well. Now let's see. Oh, I see that the technology works. I see many people in Turkey, merhaba, in Russia, Dobry dzień, Italy, buongiorno, Japan, I don't speak Japanese, South Korea, Philippines, India, Spain, buenos días. An early bird in the US, I see. Good morning. And many people in additional people in Europe, so that I cannot see where it is. So welcome everybody, nice to meet you all. The basis for accurate MedDRA coding is good knowledge about MedDRA scope, its structure, and its characteristics. That's for sure. So MedDRA intends to achieve standardization in medical coding. With MedDRA, we are now speaking the same language when exchanging information on safety data, on clinical safety data, from pre-marketing and clinical development to post-marketing in pharmacovigilance. MedDRA has replaced legacy terminologies like COSTAR that was mainly used in clinical studies and HUART that was mainly used in post-marketing. It is not only used by the biopharmaceutical industry, but also by many regulatory authorities around the globe. Today, we will be focusing on the data entry aspect, the operational coding part. But MedDRA also has features that support data retrieval and analysis, as well as presentation of clinical safety data. This whole topic is addressed in separate webinars. One is called Data Analysis and Query Building with MedDRA, and the other one introduces the standardized MedDRA queries, or SMQs. This is really a key slide that shows what is in the scope of MedDRA or what type of medical terms is covered by MedDRA. In the blue circle, you will find all medical terms and conditions that are within its scope. So it incorporates terms for medical conditions, diagnosis, clinical signs and symptoms, for indications for use, investigational terms, test results, test names and also test results with qualifiers, increased, decreased, normal, abnormal, whatsoever, medical surgical procedure terms, terms that relate to medical, social, family history of the patients for coding medical history data, pharmacogenetic terms, toxicologic issues, many terms that relate to medication errors or product use issues, and also product quality issues and device-related issues. And last but not least, the standardized queries, the standardized MedDRA queries. On the other hand, MedDRA excludes terms that relates to frequencies, for instance, unless such information is medically relevant, like frequent micturition, for instance. The same holds true for indicators of severity. You will only find a few of them on PT level where clear medical definitions exist for characterization of the condition, like in the case of PT severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS. You will not find any numerical values for investigational results, lab results, but qualifiers like normal, abnormal. I mentioned that already. In patient demographic terms, relating to race, gender, age, etc., are also excluded, again with the exception of terms where information regarding age or gender is relevant based on medical considerations. Like, for instance, when it comes to male or female infertility, male or female breast cancer, senile dementia, infantile acne, or neonatal jaundice. So here you would find specific terms that include demographic information, but you won't find them for each and every medical condition that is represented in MedDRA. MedDRA is not a drug dictionary, nor is it a medical equipment, device, or diagnostic product dictionary, meaning that you will not find any brand names in the terminology, but there are several terms that include generic drug names, like, for instance, the PT thalidomide, embryopathy. And you won't find brand names for devices, but terms for specific device types, like catheters, joint prostheses, cardiac pacemakers, etc. And finally, MedDRA does not contain any terms that refer to clinical trial study design, like double-blind, placebo-controlled, etc. So that's really important to remember. Let us now shortly look at the structure of MedDRA and how MedDRA is organized. MedDRA has a systematic 5-level structure, starting with the system organ class or SOC on the top and the high-level group terms or HLGTs underneath that then group the high-level terms or HLTs. Under the HLTs, you will find the preferred terms or PTs, representing the medical concept level. The PT level is used for data retrieval, for data presentation, and for data analysis. And the PTs then group the lowest level terms, or LLTs, that are used for data entry and operational coding. And you can see that starting from the top, MedDRA gets more and more granular. It is only on the LLT, so we have 27 SOCs, and on the lowest level term level, we have more than 90,000 terms. So you would have to browse these 90,000 LLTs, so to say, in order to find the most specific term for your verbatim for coding purposes. Please note that British English is used at the PT level and above. It is only on the LLT level where you would find terms in American English. So if you would look for a specific PT and use American English for your search in the browser, you will hardly get any results. Here are the 27 system organ classes, and some of them group terms based on their manifestation site, like, for instance, vascular disorders, skin and subcutaneous tissue disorders, nervous system disorders, musculoskeletal and connective tissue disorders, cardiac disorders, etc. Other SOCs group terms based on the etiology of the respective conditions, like, for instance, endocrine disorders or immune system disorders or neoplasms or infections and infestations. SOCs investigations and surgical and medical procedures, group terms based on their purpose. SOC product issues is also a special one, group terms that relate to product quality issues. And SOC social circumstances contains terms that describe the social context of patients, like lifestyle issues, family issues, etc. Please note that terms from this SOC should normally not be used for coding adverse events. They are rather reserved for coding medical history data of patients. So you will need a good knowledge about these SOCs and their content in order to get a better feel on where to search in MedDRA, in the whole MedDRA hierarchy, to find a specific medical concept or term. Let's look at an example for the MedDRA hierarchy, in this instance in SOC cardiac disorders. Under this SOC, you will find 10 HLGTs representing the main types of cardiac disorders. Here we have selected HLGT cardiac arrhythmias. Under this HLT, there are several HLTs grouping PTs for the different types of arrhythmias, like supraventricular arrhythmias, ventricular arrhythmias, etc. The HLT shown on this slide is the HLT rate and rhythm disorders, NEC. And NEC stands for Not Elsewhere Classified. NEC groupings are only found on HLGT and HLT level. They represent somehow miscellaneous groupings of terms that do not fit into any other HLT or HLGT. One of the PTs under this HLT, rate and rhythm disorders NEC, is the PT arrhythmia. And this PT now groups a number of LLTs that are not all shown on this slide, they just don't fit. LLTs represent synonyms, quasi-synonyms, or lexical variants of the PT term, and also colloquial, patient-friendly terms. The LLT level is the data entry level, and the granularity on the LLT level provides guidance to medical coders and thereby facilitates accurate and consistent coding. Now let's look at the LLTs under PT arrhythmias that are shown on this slide. Arrhythmia NOS stands for arrhythmia not otherwise specified. It doesn't make a lot of difference whether you select arrhythmia NOS or the LLT arrhythmia. But it is good practice to only use the NOS terms when it is explicitly reported that a given condition could not be further specified in the verbatim. So if just arrhythmia is reported without any further information, it would be good practice to select LLT arrhythmia and not to assume that it is not otherwise specified. LLT dysrhythmias represents a synonym for arrhythmia, and some of the LLTs are labeled non-current, like this LLT, other specified cardiac dysrhythmias. It is marked in red, and this is also how the non-current LLTs are highlighted in the MedDRA browser. Non-current terms are only found on LLT level, important to know. LLTs are set non-current when identified as ambiguous, truncated, not following the MedDRA naming conventions, when they are misspelled, or when not following MedDRA rules in the case of combination terms. They are flagged and should not be used for ongoing coding. But they are not removed from the terminology in order to preserve the information from legacy cases. So if you have logged a clinical database in a previous MedDRA version, you would still be able to find these terms, although they were made non-current, and could map them to a better term. An example for a non-current LLT is the CoStar term nausea and vomiting, for instance, representing a combination term that is represented by two separate MedDRA PTs. It has the non-current status and is grouped under PT vomiting. Another example would be the ambiguous term angina, a term that is most frequently used to describe angina pectoris, but that may also relate to angina tonsillaris. Another feature of the MedDRA structure is its multi-axiality, allowing for presentation of PTs in multiple SOCs based on medical considerations. Now, what is meant by that? Let's take the example of dyspnea, shortness of breath. If I would ask you in what SOC you would expect this to be in, some of you may say in SOC respiratory, based on the manifestation side. But others may say in SOC cardiac disorders because dyspnea is an important symptom of cardiac disease. And both of you would be right. You will find PT dyspnea under both system organ classes, one based on its manifestation side, but also based on the etiology of the condition. This now allows for data presentation and analysis based on different medical considerations, depending on your area of interest and also product-specific considerations. In order to achieve standardization again, for cumulative data output of MedDRA-coded data, all PTs with multiple SOC linkages need to have a default or primary SOC assignment. This will determine which SOC represents the multi-axial PT during cumulative data output and presentation for integrated safety summaries, periodic safety reporting, etc. The primary SOC is defined by MedDRA. This feature prevents double counting of events as a respiratory or cardiac condition in our previous example that I just mentioned of PT dyspnea. And the standardization that is achieved by the primary SOC presentation of data is required by regulators as well and has to be followed. Deliberate changes of the primary SOC, even if your database allows for it, will not be accepted. Usually it is hard-coded in the coding systems, but if you have a system that allows you to choose, you must always select the primary system organ class. Let's first look at the rules for primary SOC assignment within MedDRA. If the respective PT has only one SOC linkage, obviously this SOC is automatically its primary SOC. PTs for diseases in clinical signs and symptoms have their prime manifestation site as primary SOC. But there are three exceptions. Firstly, congenital and hereditary conditions always have the SOC congenital as primary SOC. Secondly, neoplasm terms always have SOC neoplasms as primary SOC, with the exception of cysts and polyps, which have their prime manifestation site as primary SOC. And thirdly, infections and infestation terms always have SOC infections as primary SOC. Again, most PTs are grouped based on their manifestation site, with the exception of these three system organ classes. Here an example using PT obesity, cardiomyopathy. It has SOC cardiac disorders as primary SOC representing the site of manifestation, and a secondary linkage to SOC metabolism and nutrition disorders representing the etiology of the condition. Please note that a PT can have any number of secondary linkages, not just one or two. Especially in SOC congenital, there are PTs that represent really very complex congenital anomalies that affect multiple body sites. They may have up to 7 secondary SOC linkages, like, for example, the PT charge syndrome. All these additional linkages are called secondary. There are no tertiary or quaternary linkages. They are all equal. There is no ranking among them. And please note that multi-axiality starts at PT level, not at LLT level. Each LLT is only linked to one PT. Many PTs are assigned a primary SOC based on the site of manifestation. But as mentioned before, there are three exceptions: SOC congenital, SOC neoplasms, and SOC infections. And here we see an example for one of these three exceptions. PT influenza has SOC infections and infestations as primary SOC, and only a secondary linkage to the site of manifestation, that is SOC respiratory. Some PTs may contain information that relate to more than one of these exception SOCs. If so, the following prioritization applies. The congenital SOC has the first priority. Neoplasms is second, and SOC infections and infestations has the third priority. As an example, for instance, the PT infected neoplasm would have neoplasms as primary SOC and only a secondary linkage to SOC infections. In addition, there are 3 single axial SOCs that you should be aware of. PTs in these 3 SOCs only appear here and nowhere else. They are never multi-axial. And these are the system organ classes I'm talking about: investigations, surgical and medical procedures, and social circumstances. So you will not find any terms that relate to lab results of hepatic parameters in SOC hepatobiliary. You will only find them in SOC investigations. And you won't find terms for hepatic surgery in SOC hepatobiliary. Again, they are only represented in SOC surgical and medical procedures. And a term like hearing aid user, you'll only find in SOC social circumstances, not in SOC ear disorders. Did we get any questions so far? Leander, let me stop here.
Actually, one just came in, Caroline, just on time. They must have realised you were going to stop for a question. So the question is, my basic question is, why many PTs are the same as LLTs?
Oh, that's always the case. So there's always one LLT that is identical to the PT. That's a basic MedDRA rule.
Thank you, Caroline. No other questions. Thank you.
Okay. Usually this LLT is a more general one, and it's helpful if you have a verbatim where the LLTs that relate to LLTs that are linked to the same PT. Then the rule applies that you would select the LLT that is identical to the PT. You would not select 2 or 3 LLTs that are grouped under the same PT, because then you would duplicate a reported event.
Caroline, can I interrupt you? We have one more question that came in. Why do secondary SOCs exist if they are not used for reporting?
They are used for reporting. As I said, you may use them based on medical considerations. So if you if you have a cardiac product, so a product that is used for cardiac insufficiency, for instance, then you would rather use event counts in SOC cardiac. So you would use secondary linkages and not refer, in our example for dyspnea, you would not represent your events in the primary SOC. So for cumulative data output, you would always use the primary SOC. But if it comes to analysis, you may use secondary linkage in order to group similar events and have a better impression on the specific questions you are looking for, like cardiac insufficiency.
Thank you, Caroline. There's no more questions at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Leander. So some 2 questions for you, two quiz questions. So in which SOCs would you expect to find PT portopulmonary hypertension, based on manifestation site and based on etiology? What do you think? Respiratory, correct. That would be the site of manifestation, and this would be the primary SOC assignment, of course. Vascular disorders, yeah, because it's portal hypertension that we are talking about. Respiratory, primary SOC, vascular, yes. So cardiac disorders would not be correct, but portopulmonary hypertension, you have a portal hypertension when you have an hepatic disorder. So actually hepatobiliary disorders would be a secondary linkage. So the primary SOC assignment would be respiratory, and the This term has two secondary linkages, one to hepatobiliary disorders and one to vascular disorders, because pulmonary arterial hypertension, of course, is a vascular disorder. So this is how this classification in MedDRA works. And here another question. Please select the primary SOC for the PT congenital HIV infection. This PT has linkages to all 4 SOCs that are shown on the slide, but which would be the primary SOC? Remember what I mentioned earlier about the prioritization of these exception SOCs, namely SOC congenital, SOC infections and infestations, and SOC neoplasms. Yes, you are right. So most of you got it right. Congenital always would have priority over infections and infestations. So there are primary SOC would be congenital, and then secondary linkages would be to pregnancy, because it's a congenital condition, because perinatal conditions are grouped in this SOC, infections and infestations, because it is an infection, and because it's an HIV infection, it would also have a secondary linkage to immune system disorders. So well done, thank you. So this training will not be able to provide you with all details of MedDRA structure and related rules and definitions. To better understand MedDRA, please refer to the MedDRA introductory guide that you can find under how to use and support documentation on the MedDRA website. In this document, you will find specific MedDRA rules and conventions as well as naming conventions that are relevant to better understand MedDRA classifications. For example, per convention, the abdominal wall is considered a gastrointestinal structure, and you will see that it is grouped in SOC gastrointestinal disorders, such terms. And the pharynx and diaphragm are considered respiratory structures. So I would highly recommend to study this document, at least the introduction to this document, thoroughly, so that your searches for suitable MedDRA codes are more focused and targeted. Especially for beginners or less experienced MedDRA users, it's really helpful. This is a really helpful document, and I'm sure that you will find it useful. So now we will talk about coding conventions. Coding conventions alone, of course, do not guarantee good quality coding. It's an essential prerequisite for good quality coding, but alone they do not guarantee good quality. Of utmost importance is the specification and clarity of the verbatim. All relevant information has to be captured in the verbatim during term extraction from the case report in pharmacovigilance, and any ambiguous or vague terms have to be queried both during case processing and in clinical development. Also, the individuals working in operational coding and performing the quality review should have, first of all, adequate medical background, a sound MedDRA expertise, and detailed knowledge of the coding conventions and the coding tools. And additional training has to be provided with each new release of MedDRA and updates of the coding conventions. Tools like autocoders and synonym lists can support coding accuracy and consistency and provide guidance to coders, but quality review would still be necessary. What you can see here, the unqualified test name term list can support the quality control by identifying test names without qualifiers, just the test names, so they do not contain any decreased, positive, abnormal, etc., that were entered as adverse events. You will find this list under the header support documentation on the MedDRA website. So that's easy. It's an easy exercise to run this unqualified test name term list over your adverse event, adverse reaction coding in order to identify any terms that do not contain any qualifier, because this doesn't make sense. Now, what are the coding conventions at all? Generally speaking, coding conventions are written guidelines for coding with MedDRA in your organization. It is crucial to have them not only for your operational tasks, but also for inspection readiness. Inspectors ask for them, and you should have them available in writing to show that all medical coders are doing their job based on defined conventions. They may address topics like handling of misspellings, abbreviations, or acronyms. Another area you may want to cover are combination terms and due to combinations of medical concepts, how to handle those. There may also be terms that you would always like to query for example, chest pain, to find out whether it is of cardiac origin or caused by other non-cardiac events, like, for example, pulmonary embolism. But you may also want to query reports of an unspecified infarction, necrosis, occlusion, etc., in order to find out the affected anatomical site. And you find these vague terms, infarction, necrosis, occlusion, in MedDRA. You may ask yourself why such documents are needed at all. First of all, coders may have a very different background and they may need guidance how to handle very specific medical terms within MedDRA in order to achieve medically accurate coding output. Also, MedDRA is very large and nearly always provides a variety of coding options as compared to previous legacy terminologies. That is why coders need more guidance on how to prioritize and handle these options in order to achieve coding consistency, especially when they are working in different functions and geographical regions. And you may have the need for more specific coding rules for certain medical areas based on your product portfolio. It is often assumed that autocoders that look for a match between a verbatim and an LLT would solve all these problems. But this is not the case, because even with really sophisticated autocoding algorithms, which follow organizational coding conventions and lots of testing, autocoders will not cover all verbatims, so manual coding will still be needed. And clearly, also autocoding results will have to be reviewed by qualified individuals with good medical background and sound MedDRA knowledge. Because not only human beings may assign wrong codes or code inconsistently, but also autocoders may run into problems when trying to interpret textual information that is relevant for coding. In the first example, it is reported that a patient was allergic to a CAT scan, and it was autocoded to allergy to cats. In the second example, a myocardial infarction in the fall of 2000 is reported, and this verbatim was split and autocoded to myocardial infarction and fall. And these are real-life examples that nicely demonstrate that the QC of autocoding output is definitely needed. Let me stop here again. Leander, do we have questions?
No questions. I'm just looking at the question panel in case any pop in as you've just mentioned it, but no questions at the moment. Thanks, Caroline.
So then let's have a look into this ICH guidance document for our topic today that is called MedDRA Term Selection Points to Consider document. With this document, you do not have to start with your in-house coding conventions from scratch, but you can take the guidance document as the basis for your own coding rules. But you really have to be aware that whatever you decide to do and define in your coding conventions, your rules should be fully consistent with this document. You may amend certain areas, but you should not contradict any rule that is outlined in this document. Otherwise, you will run into problems during inspections, or you may get feedback from regulatory authorities regarding your coding quality. If you have no need for in-house coding conventions, you may, of course, also use this PTC document as coding convention within your organization. Here is a snapshot of the front cover of the full PTC document. This is how it looks like, and it provides term selection advice for industry and regulatory purposes. And of course, it has the objective to promote accurate and consistent term selection to facilitate the fact that we are all speaking the same language when exchanging or discussing clinical data information. This document was developed and is maintained by an international expert working group appointed by the ICH Management Committee with members from regulatory and bodies and industry of the ICH regions, the MSSO, and the Japanese Maintenance Organization, or JMO, and the WHO as an observer. There is one complete and comprehensive version that is available in English, Japanese, Brazilian Portuguese, Chinese, French, Korean, Spanish, and Russian. The English version is released with each major MedDRA version release, that means beginning of March each year. The translations follow on March 15th. In addition, there are condensed versions of this original document in other MedDRA languages, except those that I have just mentioned. And you see these languages listed on the slide: Arabic, Czech, Dutch, German, Hungarian, Italian, Portuguese. These condensed versions focus on the general coding principles without going into further details for selected topics. They are not updated with each MedDRA release, but on an as-needed basis. You'll find the document under the menu How to Use and submenu Support Documentation on the MedDRA website, and I will shortly show you where to find it. Let me look at it. Oops. Here we are on the MedDRA website, How to Use Support Documentation. And then it will open. Here we are. And here are the points to consider documents and MedDRA best practices document. Here is the MedDRA term selection document in different formats, as PDF, in a Word format, HTML format that is easy to navigate. And also we have a so-called redlined version in Word format, where the changes as compared to the previous version of the document are highlighted. So if you are already familiar with this document, you may only refer to the redlined version to easily identify the changes. I previously mentioned the MedDRA introductory guide. This is where you can find it for the latest MedDRA version. Here is the introductory guide for MedDRA itself, and also a summary what is new in MedDRA version 29.0. Also always helpful to look into. So here we are, back to our slides. So this PTC document provides comprehensive guidance and clear recommendation, but it's important to know that in some instances, it may provide more than one option to choose from. One of them will always be indicated as preferred one, but you are free to choose the alternative option as well. If it is more suitable for your organization. Whatever you choose, document your approach in your coding conventions. Train your coders appropriately so that they are consistent in their choice of option. So you cannot take this PTC document as your coding conventions. You will always have to look into it for these situations where you have two options, how to code specific scenarios, like diagnosis with signs and symptoms, for instance. So you have to make your choice and then document your choice, your approach in your own in-house coding conventions. Now let's look into some general coding principles that are addressed in the PTC document. Quality of source data, the impact, how to perform quality assurance and why, the rule to not alter MedDRA, we talked about already, the rule to always select a lowest level term when doing operational coding, because operational coding is done on LLT level, to only select current LLTs, when to request a new term in MedDRA via the change request process, the rule to use medical judgment in term selection, sometimes necessary when you do not find a direct match, a very very easy matching term in MedDRA. Select terms for all reported information. So do not omit any information that is medically relevant, and also do not add information. That's the basic MedDRA rule, code as reported. And I will go through them one by one on the next slides. First topic is the relevance of good quality source data, the quality of data input. You all know what is meant by garbage in, garbage out. The quality of your data input, of course, has a huge impact on the quality of your data output. So if you get poor data, unclear, ambiguous verbatims as a coder, always try to obtain clarification of the data. It is also advisable to have an eye on CRF standards and design of these CRFs in clinical development. They must be carefully designed in order to provide clear data for coding purposes. As an example, if you have tick boxes on your CRF that are to be mapped to MedDRA afterwards, these should not be associated with multiple MedDRA terms, because you wouldn't know how to code it, how to map this. This means that MedDRA-related training is not only relevant for coders, but also for other functions in your organization, including investigators, to make sure that you get appropriate term specification for coding purposes. The document goes on with the topic quality assurance. First of all, internal processes should ensure that all relevant information is available for coders during term selection. Only then they are able to capture all reported information and code as specifically as possible. Code assignments should be QC'd with an appropriate and systematic approach by experienced coders or physicians that are MedDRA experts. That is also true for autocoder output. We have seen this before. By the way, also regulators perform coding QC of data submitted by different companies and provide feedback in case of relevant inconsistencies or relevant coding issues. Now, thinking about data quality, you've got a reported term or verbatim of compression T4, T5. Would you code it or would you seek clarification? What would you do? Compression T4, T5. So obviously this relates to the thoracic spine. Would you be able to code this or would you seek clarification? Most of you got it right. You would seek clarification. Let me close the poll. Why can't we code the reported term compression T4, T5? Why can't we code this directly? Why do we have to query? We can't assume, yes. What could it relate to? It's too vague, it's too unspecific. Yeah, we don't have enough information to, we should not interpret. That's the basic MedDRA rule, yes. Yeah, because the affected site is not specified. Is it the thoracic spine itself? Or is it the vertebra leading to a compression fracture, for instance? Or is it a compression of an intervertebral disc, the spinal cord, or a nerve root? This needs to be clarified. And that is why I wouldn't accept this term if I was a coder and would query for more information. So well done. Thank you for joining. Now let's have another short exercise before addressing the next general term selection principle. Once you have selected an LLT that represents the verbatim, You choose the SOC that makes medical sense when coding, or you follow the predetermined MedDRA hierarchy. What would be correct here? During coding, you would follow the predetermined MedDRA hierarchy. Correct. This is what you would do. If you are more working in the analysis area, when you want to present your data, then you can choose also to present data via the secondary SOC linkage. But if you code and you have selected an LLT and your primary SOC assignment is not hardwired in MedDRA in your coding tool, then you you should always select the primary SOC that is defined by MedDRA itself. So you not make your own choice. So we already talked about the principle to not alter MedDRA when addressing primary SOC assignment that is hardwired in MedDRA. If you find a term that is inappropriate placed in the terminology, please do not change the MedDRA hierarchy on your own, even if your database allows to do so, but instead submit a change request to the MSSO through the established change request process so that it can be reviewed and considered. Coding is done on LLT level, the data entry level. We also discussed this before, and only current LLTs must be used in ongoing coding. The LLT selected should capture as much information provided by the original verbatim as possible. As can be seen in this example here, reported is an abscess on the face. This verbatim should not be coded to just abscess, because it is medically relevant to also capture the manifestation site, because it could be an abscess in the brain, abscess in the lung, whatsoever. So we would select LLT facial abscess in order to capture as much information from the report as we can. And always remember to select current LLTs only. The non-current LLTs are still in the terminology for historical purposes to support interpretation of legacy data and legacy data conversion, but they should not be used for ongoing coding. Beside the previous example with the reported abscess on face, here another example where you may struggle with MedDRA specificity. How would you code red skin on soles of feet? You see that there are plenty of somehow suitable LLTs to choose from. And this is often the case in MedDRA. So MedDRA is very granular. Skin red, it is the red skin on soles of feet, erythema of extremities, plantar erythema, redness of legs in order to capture the fact that both feet were affected, or would you select localized erythema because it's a very local reaction on the feet? What would you do? Most of you, so we have a split of opinions, but most of you are going for plantar erythema, and this is fully right. Plantar erythema is even a separate PT. All other LLTs are grouped under PT erythema. So in this instance, the code assignment makes a difference on PT level. So you got it right. Well done. Thank you. If you can't find a suitable MedDRA term that adequately represents the medical condition to be coded, don't solve it with workarounds, but use medical judgment. As an example, at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, when receiving a report of an event related to COVID-19 infection, one wouldn't have found an exact term for it in MedDRA. But when using medical judgment, you would have found terms like coronavirus infection, not as specific, but capturing the medical concept on a more general level. This term was to be selected as a placeholder before COVID-19 terms were added to MedDRA. To avoid workarounds, look for a more general term. Look for terms with a slightly different wording that represent the concept. Use online references and medical textbooks like the Dorlands, the professional version of the Merck manual, Access Medicine, websites of well-known university hospitals, etc., to check for synonyms in medical terminology, because these may already be represented in MedDRA. But if, despite these efforts, you finally cannot find a suitable term, then submit a change request to the MSSO to get a better term. So medical knowledge is more relevant for coding than in previous times, when coding was in the hands of data managers. MedDRA requires sound medical knowledge and quite frequently also the input of physicians to achieve medically accurate coding output. Any questions, Leander?
Yes, we had a question about split coding.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to take it now or...
Yes, we can do so.
Thank you. Is there advice around when an event should be coded to 2 LLTs to capture all of the information versus asking the reporter to split into 2 individual events, each with 1 LLT?
So you would always look for combination terms in MedDRA. There are many of those, and we will see some of them later on. But if you do not find a combination term, and this medical information is relevant, truly relevant for subsequent analysis, because of medical considerations, then you would need to query and ask the investigator to split code. In pharmacovigilance, of course, you can do it immediately. You can split code based on the case information that you get. But yes, in clinical trials, you have to then go back to the investigator and ask for splitting. There's no, I cannot provide you with a general rule when to do it. It's really based on medical considerations. If it's medically relevant to capture the full information, then you need to split code.
Thanks, Caroline. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Oops. Remember, we are still with the basic principles for MedDRA term selection. So when coding, do not omit medically relevant information. This is what we just discussed with the combination and splitting. In other words, make sure to capture and appropriately classify all reported events. We are not interested in causality because it is captured elsewhere, but we would capture all reports of adverse reactions or adverse events, and also device-related events, product quality issues, medication errors, medical and social history, investigations, and indications as appropriate. As mentioned in the previous slide, we should cover as much of the medically relevant information of the reported verbatim as possible. And we saw that in the example describing a facial abscess. But on the other hand, we should not add any information. In this example, abdominal pain, increased serum amylase, and increased serum lipase, no diagnosis, pancreatitis, should be made out of these signs and symptoms. In other words, as coders, we should code as reported without adding or omitting medically relevant information. That's the basic rule, code as reported. Do not interpret and make a diagnosis out of this information. This is not our job as coders, but should take place when it comes to data retrieval and data analysis, where one would look for clusters of findings indicating specific diagnosis. As coders, we would split such a report and code all these findings separately. After these more general coding principles discussed in the first part of the PTC document, the second part then addresses some specific coding topics, individual types of data, and how to handle them in operational coding. And here they are: diagnosis and provisional diagnosis with or without signs and symptoms, how to handle outcomes like death and hospitalization, for instance, how to handle reports on suicide and self-harm, how to handle conflicting, ambiguous, vague information, congenital terms, investigational terms, and this continues on the next page here, on the next slide, misuse, abuse, addiction, medication errors, drug interaction, medical social history, indications for product use, off-label use, and how to handle reports on product quality issues. So if you are not familiar with the document yet, I can only really highly recommend to read the document to make yourself familiar with the contents so that you know where to find guidance for these coding scenarios. You don't have to know it by heart, but you have to know where to go in order to find guidance for specific coding challenges. And of course, you should be very much familiar with the content if you are responsible for your own in-house coding conventions in order to make sure that your conventions do not contradict the rules and the guidance provided in the PTC document. Any further questions, Leander?
Not at the moment, thanks, Caroline.
Thank you. So then let's start with the MedDRA browsers, because in order to efficiently and effectively search for suitable MedDRA terms for a given verbatim, it is not only relevant to understand MedDRA structure and rules and the details of the PTC document for MedDRA term selection and your own in-house coding conventions, but it is also crucial to make yourself familiar with the MSSO MedDRA browsing tools or your own in-house tools to browse MedDRA. They are free to use, so the MSSO browsers are free to use by our MedDRA license holders, and I will introduce some of their functionalities that are relevant for operational coding in the next 2 slides. The MedDRA browsers are used to browse the terminology in order to find suitable terms for coding or suitable standardized MedDRA queries as well for data retrieval purposes. Out of the 3 MedDRA browsers that are provided by the MSSO, one is intended to be installed on local computers. This is the desktop browser. It can be downloaded from the MedDRA website together with the release files and makes you independent from internet access. A new MDB MedDRA desktop browser was released in 2025 and has now the same look and feel like the new web-based browser that we have. If you download the browser from the MedDRA website, it will already contain the latest versions of the English MedDRA version. But if you would like to see additional languages or earlier MedDRA versions, you would need to load them into the MDB on your own, again from the MedDRA website. 2 of the MedDRA browsers are accessible via the internet. A mobile version for smartphones and tablet computers, and a version for use with laptop and desktop computer. You can see 2 URLs for the WBB here on the slide. One for the new web-based browser, here it is, and one for the legacy one. Both are currently available as we are still in the transition period, but the legacy web-based browser will be switched off at some point in the future. I will use the new browser in today's webinar. It provides nearly all functionalities of the legacy one, but the user interface looks different. All these browsers require a MedDRA ID and password in order to access them. They support the view and search of MedDRA itself and also the SMQs. They support all MedDRA languages, and they have a language-specific interface. And the desktop browser and the web-based browser have the ability to export search results and research bin to local file systems. That's a feature that is relevant for building own in-house queries, not relevant for coding purposes. There are some features of the browsers that mainly relate to data retrieval and analysis, and I have highlighted those that are useful for coders in red lettering. For coding purposes, the view of the primary and secondary link information and the advanced search options are very helpful to make your searches more focused and efficient. The advanced search options are available in the new MedDRA desktop browser and the legacy web-based browser. Currently, the new web-based browser does not include advanced search functions, but this is being worked on with the intention to make this feature available later this year. If you are considering the submission of a change request to the MSSO and would like to see whether another MedDRA user has already submitted such a request, then the supplemental view of the browser is really helpful. Please note that this feature is not available in the desktop browser. And I will demonstrate this in a minute. If you would like to learn even more about its functionalities, please refer to a recorded webinar that was provided by my colleague Jane Knight, where the look and feel of the new web-based browser is demonstrated. You can find it on our YouTube channel. And you can also find demonstrations of this new web-based browsers in Chinese and in Russian, if you would like to watch those, again on the YouTube channel. So now let me switch screens in order to give you a short introduction into the basic functionalities of the browser. Here we are. And here we are on the website. If I go to how to use, tools, browsers, there's an open the new web-based browser. If you want to work with a legacy browser, here's a shortcut to the legacy web-based browser. To open the new one, you would need to use this link here. And then this window will open. You would need your ID and your password, and then you can log in. You see, if you already have used the legacy web-based browser, the user interface looks very different. It's focusing really on search, on the search features of the browser. So the first thing that you have to do when accessing this browser is to look at the settings, because you can set up the settings of the browser based on your own needs to make it most useful for your own purposes. So the interface language can be chosen here, what version you would like to see, the primary language. If you want to see always additional language, you can choose from. And here you can switch between the released versions of MedDRA and the supplemental view. Then you can, the navigation bar appearance, here the language, tools, settings button. So you have to play a bit with it in order to find what is most useful for you. I have set it up in a way that it is good for demonstration purposes. A link to the documentation, a direct link to the MedDRA concept descriptions, MedDRA documentation is helpful. If you would always have to have a direct click to the user guide, you may want to click the user guide as well. For the search filters, I would really recommend to use all of them. And for the display options, I wouldn't like to see the codes because it makes the interface too busy, but I would like to see the non-current terms, the inactive PTs and SMQs, but I would not like to see a synonym list. You can always restore the default settings if you are, if you do not want, if you want to reset, to rebuild your user interface. So that's the settings. What else do we have? The legends, very important. You should be very familiar with the legends. If a PT has a blue square around it, it marks a PT that you look at in its primary SOC. It's a multi-axial PT you are looking at in its primary SOC. Green square means it's again a multi-axial PT. You are looking at it in its secondary SOC. Red square means it's an uniaxial primary term. A single axial does not have any secondary linkages. Blue square around the sock means this is the primary sock. And here are the non-current LLTs, red square and LLT in red lettering. So this is important to remember. What else? So here we have the version. You can choose any version down to MedDRA version 2.1, the first that was released. Here are all the translations, the language versions of MedDRA. You can either use the SOC view or the SMQ view. Because we are talking about coding today, we will be using the SOC view. Here are the tools. If you click on it, you see some features that are helpful for data analysis purposes, but the MVAT version report may be useful for you if you want to get a report that compares any version of any two versions of MedDRA. Then the MVAT tool is very helpful. I'm not able to demonstrate it today, but we have instructional videos that you can watch, and also on our YouTube channel we have recorded webinars where the MVAT, the MedDRA version analysis tool, is demonstrated. And here you have a description as well. So here, this little icon is the MedDRA concept descriptions. Very important and very helpful. So these are not medical definitions for the respective medical terms, but the concept descriptions describe how certain terms are interpreted and classified in MedDRA. So you see them in alphabetical order: abuse, addiction, application site. Let's look for instance, overdose. How is overdose defined for the purposes of term selection and analysis of MedDRA coded data? Overdose is more than the maximum recommended dose, either in quantity and or concentration. In other words, an excessive dose. And if you look into underdose, again, underdose is the administration of less than the minimum recommended dose in quantity and or concentration. So, of course, we do not have concept descriptions for all terms that you can find in MedDRA, but it's always worthwhile to look into these concept descriptions if you are not fully sure what is meant by a certain term. So, close. Let's go back. Then here you have a direct link to the MedDRA documentation that I've shown you earlier, the points to consider document and the introductory guide, etc. And here also the settings. So you have two options to access the settings and adapt settings if necessary. Okay, now how to use this browser. Let's assume that we are looking for a term for the cardiac function is insufficient. So it was reported cardiac function is insufficient. We would, of course, look into cardiac disorders when doing a top-down search. Click on this little plus sign here and look at the HLDTs. And here we have the heart failures. And if we look into the heart failures, we see heart failure signs and symptoms, left, right ventricular failures. This was not specified in our verbatim. Our verbatim just says cardiac function insufficiency. So we would look into heart failures NEC, not elsewhere classified. And here we find acute, chronic, we find very neonatal cardiac failure. So cardiac failure, this should be the best approximation to our verbatim. Let's see what type of LLTs we find underneath. We would always look for the LLTs that is closest to our verbatim, and this would be insufficiency cardiac or cardiac insufficiency. So it was insufficient cardiac function. You would go with insufficiency cardiac to also have the right word order. If it would, the reported verbatim would say cardiac function is insufficient, you would rather select cardiac insufficiency. But of course, it doesn't make a big difference. So this is how you would do a top-down search in the browser. But you could also use the search field in the middle of the screen. And let's assume that we are looking now for kidney insufficiency. And you would press search. And first of all, you see some adrenal terms, because renal, the string renal is contained in these terms, but we have also the renal insufficiency terms. We don't find any kidney insufficiency, so the synonym list that works behind this browser has replaced kidney with renal. So here we are, renal insufficiency and insufficiency renal again. So depending on the word order in your verbatim, you would either select insufficiency renal or renal insufficiency. So what you can do now is to really check. If you click on the LLT and say open details and occurrences, you will see that this is a single axial PT. So renal and urinary disorders is the primary SOC, blue square around the SOC name, and you can see the full hierarchy. If you would look into some other, let me check this HLT here, where we have some terms that have only a secondary linkage, the green ones with the green square. Let me look at these, open details and occurrences. Here you see that the primary SOC is vascular disorders and cardiac disorders is only the secondary SOC of this PT, obstructive shock. So this is how you can immediately check the hierarchy. What you can also do, if you have this insufficiency renal term here, let me close this, you can say, go to browser and do a bottom-up search, meaning that you can see your LLT, but now you can see this LLT in the full hierarchy within this HLT and HLGT. So you could look for additional PTs that may even be more specific for your coding purposes, like for instance, renal failure neonatal. So you may have a newborn that suffered renal insufficiency. Then this would be the best, the most specific approach to take for coding purposes. So this is how you can do the bottom-up searches using the search window. What you could also do is you can open the history of a certain term. It takes a while and it will show you how it has developed over time. This LLT insufficiency renal, it was added in the first version of MedDRA already, not changed since version 7.1. So let me close it. And what you could also do is you could copy the code or copy the term in order to paste it somewhere. If your screen becomes too busy, you can say collapse all, and it will bring you back to the original setup of this user interface. Now, sometimes I've been talking about the supplemental view. So let's again look into the settings. And here is where you can find the supplemental view. And you see that the screen changes because you're now looking into the current status of the next MedDRA version release. It's not the released version 29.0, but you are already looking at the current status of version 29.1. And let's see whether we have, go back to the released version, and let's assume that you have a venous recanalization procedure. Venous recanalization procedure, always good to use word stems and search. No results. Let me copy this and again go to the settings, use the supplemental view, it stays, and search again. And here it is. You see there is a new LLT venous recanalization procedure. I can say open details and occurrences. I can see it. It is grouped in surgical and medical procedure, a single axial. All terms in surgical and medical procedures are always single axial. And I can only also say, close it. Oops. Here it is. Go to browser. And here it is, venous recanalization procedure. So this is what you can do, short demonstration of the browser. So are there any questions? Yeah.
Yes, there was a question. When you were showing the cardiac failure on the browser, there were some LLTs that had NOS with brackets and some without brackets. And we were asked what the difference is between those NOSs.
Yeah, there's no difference. It's just over time, naming conventions also of MedDRA have changed. So there's no difference.
Thanks, Caroline. That's all the questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, let me switch back to my slides then. And now let's go through some coding demonstrations so that you can get more familiar with MedDRA term search strategies and the MedDRA browser functionalities. So first, some tips and hints that you should be aware of. In the first step, you should not directly access the MedDRA browser, but first look at your reported term, the verbatim. Check if it is a clinical condition, diagnosis, or signs and symptoms, or an indication for use. If it is a test result, a term that relates to an injury, a procedure, whether it represents a medication error or a product use issue where it's not clear whether it was an error or whether where this information is missing, whether it refers to a quality issue, social circumstance, device issue, procedural complication, or even a combination of these. Because the type of report will influence the search that you will perform for suitable MedDRA terms. If reported by healthcare professionals and in medical language, what you often have in clinical studies, your search can be more focused and finding a suitable MedDRA term will be straightforward. If it is a consumer report, the verbatim may be vague, and these you get in pharmacovigilance, and it may not be as easy to classify. If something is reported vaguely, don't try to make more sense out of it. Remember the fundamental MedDRA coding rule, code as reported, and do not add or subtract information when coding. So break the information down to find out what was actually reported, and this will help you to find the best way to find it in the browser. When browsing MedDRA for suitable terms, first use the words from the reporter. When doing so, use word stems like intestine to cover both the wording intestine and intestinal. If your wording is too specific and too narrow, you will miss suitable terms. Also consider synonyms when searching for a condition affecting the leg, like lower limb or lower extremity. And always tick the Use Synonym List feature in the browser to further support your search. And if you have found a somewhat suitable term, look at the neighbors. There may be even better, more specific terms for your verbatim. If not successful, browse the MedDRA hierarchy with a top-down and bottom-up approach. So here we have Our first example, it is reported that a patient suffered an allergic reaction to an antibiotic. So let me switch screens again. And then let's go back to my settings. I now want the released function again. So we have an allergic reaction. Let me look for it and search. Acute allergic reaction. So let's see. Go to browser. Here it is, allergic reactions grouped under hypersensitivity under HLT allergic conditions NEC. Okay, but I have more information in my verbatim. This allergic reaction was caused by an antibiotic. So let me check in order to not omit information. And here we are, allergic reaction to antibiotics. So there is an LLT, a very specific LLT, and this is grouped under drug hypersensitivity, not just hypersensitivity. If I click on it, I see it is grouped under a different HLT. So our hypersensitivity was grouped under allergic conditions NEC. This one here is grouped under allergies to food additives, drugs, and other chemicals. So be as specific as possible in order to capture the full information that you have. So the correct term would be allergic reaction to antibiotics under drug hypersensitivity. Next one. The patient states she has been experiencing cold sweats. So what to do with this one? Back to our browser. Here we are. So what would we search for? Let me put this directly into the browser, cold sweats, and search. Nothing. So let me use the word stem and search. And here we are, cold sweat. So we should first of all not make a diagnosis and say, well, this is a sign and symptom of fever and go to fever. Fever may cause cold sweats, but this is not what has been reported. So cold as reported. If we use the actual wording cold sweats, we do not find anything. So we have to look for singular terms because MedDRA is a singular dictionary dealing with individual events. So always look for the singular, even if you have a report that is phrased in plural. The closest match here is cold sweat, and this is what I would have to select. And if you look into the hierarchy here, open details and occurrences, here we are. It has a primary linkage to skin and subcutaneous tissue disorders and a secondary linkage to the general SOC. Here we are. So let me. In the next example, 2 abnormal lab results are reported, an increased troponin and an increased CPK-MB, so an unambiguous abbreviation that you can find in MedDRA. Let's go to the browser again. First of all, let us look for troponin. Here is cardiac troponin, so we have an increased troponin, not more. Troponin C, troponin I, troponin abnormal, troponin decreased. Here it is. We have very specific ones, but here's our troponin decrease. This represents what has been reported. So now let's look for CPK-MB. And you will see that MedDRA contains some abbreviations, but only if they are unambiguous. Here you have the test name. So of course, This is nothing that should be used for coding adverse reactions, adverse events. Abnormal, increased, decreased. Here it is CPK MB increased. So this would be the correct assignment here. Open details and occurrences again. Investigations, remember again, has never secondary linkages, so all these lab values will only have one linkage to SOC investigations. So, and you should not combine this information, but you should really split code and capture the full information. You should not just lump it under cardiac enzymes increased, for instance. Are there questions? Leander, just interrupt me in case of questions.
Thanks, Caroline. There is a question, thank you. If there are signs, symptoms, and a diagnosis that pertain to that diagnosis, should all the terms be coded, or only the diagnosis and only the diagnosis report?
Yeah, that's exactly in a scenario where you have both options. So where the PTC document provides two options. If the signs and symptoms are really characteristic for the given diagnosis, confirmed diagnosis, then the preferred option is to code just the confirmed diagnosis. But you have the option to also code all signs and symptoms. This is really dependent on your data retrieval, data analysis tasks, and the preferences in there. There's one cautious remark if you take the preferred approach, because sometimes it's really difficult to decide whether a given clinical sign and symptom is really characteristic for a given diagnosis, confirmed diagnosis. It could also relate to something else. So if you want to be very, very cautious, you would split code. If you would like to keep your database lean, you would rather just code the confirmed diagnosis. Any further questions?
Thank you, Caroline. That's all the questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, let me go back. Next one. Patient accidentally took drug Y instead of drug X and became short of breath. So he mixed up his medication. So what shall we do with this one? Let's look for incorrect drug. Took the incorrect drug, search. Incorrect drug administration rate, storage, monitored, no. Wrong drug, let's look for wrong drug. It was administered, so if you took it, we need something that reflects the fact that you took a wrong drug. Wrong drug, there is a direct hit, but this is really open details and occurrences. So medication errors, product use errors and issues, NEC. It does not contain the information that the patient actually took the drug. So drug, wrong drug administered. Here it is. You see, wrong product administered. If I go, let me close it and again say open details and occurrences, you see this is now grouped under HLT, product administration errors and issues. Wrong drug administered. So this would be the correct assignment, and the patient then suffered shortness of breath. So this would be easy going because it's nearly a direct hit, short and breath. Short of breath, here it is. Go back. So here, a 2-day-old baby was noted to have mild fever. Doesn't feel well, so it's crying. So let's again have a look at the browser. Here we are. So when entering fever, I of course get a long list, a long list of all different types of fever and etiology of fever. So we would need to be more specific. We know it's a 2-day-old baby. So it's a baby. Let's look for baby. Of course, we don't find anything. This is not a medical term. Let's look for infant, maybe. Again, nothing. So then look for newborn, because this is a newborn, and search. And here we have fever neonatal. Again, the synonym list has replaced newborn by neonate or neonatal in this instance. So here we have a very specific term that even covers the demographic information that the fever affected a neonate. And you see when we click on open details and occurrences that the primary SOC is a general SOC, and it has a secondary linkage to the pregnancy, puerperium, and perinatal condition SOC, because it's a neonatal condition. Here we are. Next one. A 35-year-old woman was taking drug X to prevent relapses of multiple sclerosis. So this doesn't describe an adverse event. What is described here? What is reported here? It is an indication for use of a drug that is prevention of relapses of multiple sclerosis. So again, let's check and let's enter prevent and multiple sclerosis and search. Nothing. Again, we have to think about synonyms, quasi-synonyms for what is reported. Multiple sclerosis is a diagnosis. Sure that we will find it in MedDRA. But what would be a synonym for prevention? Let's look for prophylaxis. And here we are, multiple sclerosis relapse prophylaxis. Here it is. And if I look into the into the hierarchy again, it's under surgical medical procedures. It's an indication for use. Here it is. And remember, here all these PTs are never multi-axial. They are always single axial because it's a surgical and medical procedures SOC. Next one.
Caroline, could I interrupt you just because we've had a few questions back on example 4, if that's okay, just before you go on to the next few.
That was?
That was the shortness of breath.
Yep. Yep. What was it?
So we had 3 questions. So we had, why not just drug administration error was the first query.
Because it's too vague. You want to always code as specifically as possible. So here the wrong drug was taken. It took drug Y instead of drug X. And so he took the wrong drug, the patient. So that's why you would look for an LIT and PT that captures the full information as specifically as possible.
Thanks, Caroline. And then why wouldn't we pick shortness of breath?
Yeah, you could. Short of breath is a direct hit, so you would use it. But shortness of breath would, of course, medically it would be correct, but you always try to be as close to the verbatim as possible. That's just an operational coding rule.
Thanks, Caroline. And still on the same one, regarding the example on shortness of breath, because of medication error, how do we know that there is not one single LLT covering all concepts? Do we just browse and see what is available?
Yeah, especially when it comes to medication errors, because MedDRA is very granular in this area, you should really browse the full hierarchy. So if you know it's an administration error, I would browse this HLT that relates to administration errors and issues in order to find the correct and most specific LLT.
Thank you. And I think this is on the baby one. If the verbatim multiple infection would be reported and a follow-up could not be performed, what would we pick here, and would it be serious?
Well, serious criteria really depends on that's not really a coding question. So if you have multiple infections, you would try to code them as specifically as possible. Yeah, so and depending on your coding conventions, if you have then the fever of the neonate, depending on your coding conventions, if you would rather split code, you would code everything, then the relevant infections plus the fever, or if you rather would focus on the confirmed diagnosis, you would just only code the reported infections.
Thanks, Caroline. And one more on this particular example. And I know you'll then want to move on because you've got others.
Yes, we are running out of time.
Yeah, I know, but it's great that we've got this interaction. So just
Yeah.
let me have this one more. Why not accidental exposure to product, for example?
Oh, we are coming to this. We have an example for accidental exposure. So this here, this is the medication of this patient. He does something wrong with his own medication, and that's why it's a medication error. If he would have taken the medication of his wife, for instance, accidentally, then it would be an accidental exposure. Or when the drugs of the grandpa are on the table and a child takes it and takes one of the pills because it thinks it's sweets, then it would be an accidental exposure, because the drug is not intended for the child, is not intended for this patient when it's the drug of his wife.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm going to let you carry on. We're up to date with questions. Thank you.
Okay. So here we have another one. She had a pathologic fracture of the neck of the left femur. So we have to really hurry up a bit, so because I would like to have you code it as well. So code as reported. So we try to capture as much information as we can. We have not a traumatic fracture, but a pathologic fracture, and of the femur. Pathologic fracture of femur, and here's the neck of femur even. And it's all grouped under pathologic fracture. So we have found a very specific term for the reported condition. And if I again click and say open details and occurrences, you see it's grouped under primary SOC, musculoskeletal and connective tissue disorders, because of the manifestation site, it's affecting the bone. But you have a secondary linkage to the injury SOC because it's a fracture. And you have another secondary linkage to neoplasm SOC, because often pathological fractures are caused by neoplastic disease. That's why we have the secondary linkage in order to reflect this etiology. Next one. Following the procedure, the patient experienced several days of constipation. So we would again try to capture as much information as possible. So if I enter constipation, here we have constipation, chronic, neonatal, habitual, iatrogenic, post-procedural constipation. So here we have a term that even reflects the fact that it's occurred after procedure. We have many post-procedural terms, so it's always worthwhile to look for them in MedDRA. Remember, always try to capture the information as specifically as possible. Next one. 66-year-old man died from a ruptured aortic aneurysm. So this one is really easy. So if I enter rupture, brainstem, aortic and aneurysm. Here, aortic aneurysm rupture would be the correct term. We don't know whether it was an unspecified site. We don't know whether it was ascending or whatsoever, a dissecting one. So aortic aneurysm rupture would be the best match to our verbatim. So it's very straightforward. And of course, you would not code the fatal outcome that the patient died, because we have a reason for the death. And the PTC document clearly indicates that if you have a reason for a fatal outcome or hospitalization, then you do not have to capture the outcome, but you should capture the reason for this outcome. Next, it was determined that the product was counterfeit. So this is definitely a product quality issue. If I enter counterfeit and search for it, here we have several ones, product counterfeit and also suspected counterfeit product. So we have both, and it's two separate PTs, either suspected. Here it was confirmed that it was a product counterfeit. It's not just a suspicion. So here we would look for or assign the LLT product counterfeit. And you see, if we open details and occurrences, it's of course grouped under product issues, SOC. Counterfeit, falsified, and substandard products is the HLT. The patient was confined to a wheelchair. If I enter this wheelchair, into the browser, we have two LLTs, wheelchair support, wheelchair user. So confined to a wheelchair. If this would be reported as an adverse event, you would of course query in order to find out why the patient is sitting in a wheelchair, what the reason for it, But otherwise, the wheelchair user, if you don't have more information, this would be the best approximation. So here, if you open the details and occurrences, you will see it's grouped in social circumstances. It's a disability issue. Wheelchair support would be used when the wheelchair was a newly introduced treatment for the patient. But this is not the case here. We are just told that the patient was confined to a wheelchair, nothing else. And this wheelchair support would be grouped differently, because it's of course a medical procedure, and that is why it's grouped under SOC, surgical and medical procedure SOC. The pharmacist made a mistake in compounding the medication. So again, a medication error by the pharmacist when compounding the medication. So when preparing the medication for use, let's look for compounding. Here we are. Product compounding error. Here we are. Product preparation error. We know it was a mistake. And if you go into open details, you see it's HLT, product preparation errors and issues is the HLT. Under HLT, medication errors and other product use errors and issues. So you find HLTs that represent the stages of the drug use process, like storage, preparation, distribution, whatsoever, and also, of course, administration. And this is just an example of a case narrative that one would see in pharmacovigilance, and you see what type of information can be captured with MedDRA. So both the indication here, rheumatoid arthritis, then the medical history, colon cancer, cigarette smoking of the patient, then the actual event, the aortic valve stenosis, and that he underwent an aortic valve replacement, and after that he developed a sternal wound infection post-surgery, so post-operatively. So all of this can be captured using MedDRA, all these different types of information. Now, we are running out of time, but I would like to you to try at least to do some coding yourself. So this is what you how you can access the browser, either the new one or the legacy web-based browser, depending on your preference. This is your username and the password, just in case you don't have your credentials at hand, or you may also, of course, use your in-house browser if you have an individual one in your company. So here we are. These are the credentials. And again, should you have lost in the connection to the poll, here's again the QR code. And this is, she was diagnosed with pneumonia caused by a COVID-19 infection. The first exercise for you. She was diagnosed with pneumonia caused by a COVID-19 infection. What would you enter here? So it's a combination. We know it's a COVID-19 infection, but also we know that it is a pneumonia that was caused by COVID-19. So what would you do? Just enter the correct COVID-19 pneumonia. Correct. Fully correct. So we find a perfect combination term. Coronavirus pneumonia would be unspecific, so we would be try to be as specific as possible. So this is a SARS-CoV-2 virus that we have. It's a COVID-19 pneumonia, and that's why COVID-19 would be too short. So we would also like to capture the affected body site. So COVID-19 pneumonia, most of you got it right. Well done. Here we are. Next one. Woman ingested her husband's blood pressure during drug by mistake. Woman ingested her husband's blood pressure drug by mistake. So is this an administration error or is it something else? We had this something similar before. It's a tricky one. What would you do with this one? She ingested her husband's blood pressure drug by mistake. Which would be the correct LRT for wrong patient received medication? You would use the wrong patient received medication if the nurse did something wrong. So when she distributes medication and gives it to the wrong patient. Accidental ingestion of drug, yes. Accidental exposure. It's an accidental exposure. And you would look for the best match in MedDRA. Accidental drug exposure. You're on the correct path. Drug misadministration would be too vague. Wrong drug. Yes, but this doesn't tell whether it's an administration error or something else. So let me close and shortly show you how to look for it. So if you do a top-down search in the injury SOC, you will see that the medication errors and other product use errors and issues, this is an HLGT. If you open it, you see the hierarchy here. You see the medication errors, product use errors and issues, NEC, not elsewhere classified. And then you see the HLTs representing the stages in the medication use process. Administration, dispensing, monitoring, preparation, prescribing, selection, storage, transcribing, etc. And on the top, you have the accidental exposures to product. And this is what has been reported here. Accidental and we know it was ingested, it was taken, so it's an accidental exposure to a product, and we know we would look for a drug. Accidental ingestion of drug would be the most specific LLT that you can select. So this is how you would use the top-down search for searching for an adequate, for the most specific term for the reported scenario. If it is a child, you see that there's a separate one for an accidental exposure to a product by a child and also by an elderly person, or to product packaging. Here you have terms more, because this quite often happens, accidental ingestion of product dissecant. So here you find the accidental exposure terms. Important to remember. Sorry for that. Wanted to be too quick. So, patient developed hyponatremia while hospitalized. How would you approach this one? You know it's a hyponatremia that the patient suffered. Can we capture more information? What would you do with this one? Hospital-acquired hyponatremia. Yes, exactly. So there's again a combination term that even captures the fact that this hyponatremia was acquired in the hospital. It's a perfect combination term. So there are a few terms in MedDRA which include the information hospital-acquired or nosocomial, for instance, especially for infections. So this is always useful to look for them. Well done. Here we are. This is the correct assignment. Nurse noticed that the injection solution had an unusual odor. What is reported here? Does she have a smelling problem or is it something different? Nurse noticed that the injection solution had an unusual odor. What would you do with this one? It's a quality issue. Correct. Product odor abnormal. Exactly. Product odor abnormal is the correct LRT assignment. You would look always, there's one, of course, in American English and one in British English. You would always try to keep as close to the verbatim as possible. So this is American English. You would use the term in American English, but this is, of course, very detailed. Product odor abnormal would be the correct assignment. Let me shortly show you. So, odor abnormal. I don't want to. Odor abnormal, search. Here. Product odor abnormal. Go to browser. And we are in the product quality, product issues, product quality SOC. And here we have the product odor abnormal, product smell abnormal would be a synonym. So this, but what we also have, and this is also important to know, that we have product use complaints. And this should not be mixed up. Product use complaints, open details and occurrences, are represented in the medication errors, HLGT. And if I go to the browser, then you see here product use complaint, dislike of product smell. So this is something different. If the patient doesn't like the smell or the taste of a product, then this would be in product use complaint. But here it's really a fact. It's not just a preference of the patient. It's that the odor of the injection solution is really abnormal, different from it should be. So it's a product quality issues. So do not mix up product use complaints with product quality issues. We are approaching the end now. Next one, elderly woman complained her arm was tender where she had received her seasonal flu vaccine. So this is a site reaction, local reaction where she has received her seasonal flu vaccine, and it's specified as tenderness. What would you do with this one? Elderly woman complained her arm was tender where she had received her seasonal flu vaccine. Vaccination site tenderness. Perfect. Yeah, it's reported as tenderness. You could also, yeah, there's injection site reactions, of course, tenderness. But we would again be as specific as possible. It's not, it was injected, yes, this flu vaccine, but it's a vaccination site reaction. So we can be, again, MedDRA is very granular. So let me thank you for joining. Most of you got it right. So when we look into the browser and look into the general SOC, we find a whole HLGT for administration site reactions in it. And you see that there are vaccination site reaction and injection and infusion site reactions. So separate HLTs for these conditions. And because we know that it was a vaccine that was administered, we would go for the vaccination site reaction. And there you would find, of course, some of you have proposed pain. If you look into the vaccination site pain, you see that the tenderness is subsumed under the vaccination site pain. Also the vaccination site burning or stinging. So quasi-synonyms for vaccination site pain. But be aware that there are separate HLTs for application site reactions. So when you have topical, like cream or patches with medication, you would use the application site reactions, HLT, implant, infusion, injection, instillation, vaccination site reaction. So very specific terms for the respective products or administration methods. So with this, we have reached the end. This is what we have covered today. Last time for questions, Leander.
I'm frantically scanning just to see if any last minute ones pop in, but there's nothing there at the moment, Caroline. Thank you.
Okay. So here we have some contacts that may be useful, the URLs to the browsers, frequently asked questions, our email address of our help desk if you have questions, and of course our website where you find lot of useful information. Change request submission, training schedule, MedDRA support documentation, all relevant. These are the coming webinars. So if you are more advanced already, I can only recommend to also attend the advanced MedDRA coding webinars. You see they are provided in different languages, not only in English, Spanish, Brazilian, Portuguese, Chinese, French. Look at these, at the schedule of these webinars in order to find interesting or useful webinars for yourself. So this will be provided by myself next week, the advanced MedDRA coding webinar. We also have even more advanced coding webinars, the Let's Code Together webinars. So these are more in workshop format. So we distribute the verbatims that we will discuss beforehand so that everybody can look into them and make some assumptions how to approach them, and then we discuss how to approach them in the in this webinar. So this is really more for advanced, more experienced coders. So this is on Tuesday next week. No seats left. That Jane, my colleague Jane, and I will provide. But you see that there is a Chinese one 7th of what is it? In June, mid of June, and but there are also other Let's Code Together in that are provided by the American colleagues in English. So watch out for them if you want to join them. Then there we have the MedDRA learning management system, so where you can that you can access on your own and can do some training on your own. This is an orientation, so you see that there is an option to learn how to use this MedDRA learning management system that the MSSO provides, and again an MSSO MedDRA tool demonstration in Russia of the Russian for this new browser. Here the learning management system, just some information. It's the latest addition to our training material that was released last year. Provides a controlled environment for self-learning and has a predefined learning path, both the beginner and advanced levels that you can choose. You also have certificate and non-certificate tracks. And what is important to know that there's an unlimited number of accounts per organization. And this is how you can access it via this QR code or via this web address, and it has a lot of specific topics as well. So first of all, an overview of MedDRA coding and analysis, but then also some specific topics like outcomes, how to code outcomes, suicide, social circumstances, pregnancy cases, and also some interactive MedDRA coding exercises. What I would like to show you, and I am sorry that I have overrun time here, but what is really useful is our YouTube channel. And you find it here if you click on contact on the MedDRA website. Here is this little icon that you can use, and it will bring you to our YouTube site. And here you find recorded sessions of all of our trainers in different languages. So I can only recommend to look through them, because you will find also, if you want to recap some of the content today, so this recorded session, provided that the audio is okay, will also be posted on the YouTube channel in the next few days. So you can revisit some content if you like, or also watch the video of coding basics in a different language, in Spanish, Chinese, Russian, whatsoever, in French. And so that's an offer for you, and it's really helpful. And you see that also with the Let's Code Together sessions are provided. So all the Let's Code Together sessions can be revisited, can be watched on this YouTube channel. So with this, and sorry again for running over schedule, sorry for that. But I hope you found this webinar useful, and hope to meet you again in one of the trainings that we offer on a regular basis. And with this, I would like to thank you for your interest in today's topic and for your active participation. And also a big thank you to you, Leander, for your support today. So enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are, and goodbye for now. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.